Kid Icarus was developed by Nintendo R&D1 and released in 1986 in Japan and in the summer of 1987 in the United States. Gameplay takes the form of a side-scrolling action platformer. You play as Pit, a little angel character who shoots at enemies with his bow and arrow. Pit, however, cannot fly on his own at the beginning of the game. You have to work your way through the game collecting multiple treasures. Some items will upgrade your character and are earned through proving yourself by surviving trials of strength. There are also items that can be purchased, and one type of room where you can uncover multiple items, and once you collect one, the rest disappear. But if you push your luck too far, you could lose it all. I thought gambling in games was just limited to loot boxes. Anyway, eventually you unlock the ability to fly. When you do that, you aren't just granted the ability to fly in-game, rather the game changes to a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up style. Luckily for me, the side-scrolling phase of the game is relatively slow-paced and doesn't just become a bullet hell type game. This part is extremely enjoyable, and while challenging, feels like a reward for reaching the end of the game. Sadly, there isn't a lot of gameplay in this style, but that may be due to the game's starting development while most of Nintendo's developers were hard at work on another project, but I'll get more into that story later. Back to the gameplay itself, the controls aren't perfect, and I've encountered strange issues like being too close to an enemy causing shots to not register. The game is punishingly difficult too, starting you back at the beginning of the level when you die, which will happen a lot, because of little things you can learn to avoid, but mostly only through trial and error. It feels much like it was inspired by an arcade game, even though it actually was developed directly for the Nintendo Entertainment System. The number of deaths you experience in the game makes you feel like they were trying to just take as many quarters out of your pockets as possible. But the game was originally developed for the Famicom Disk System. I would have loved to have seen the game's save system and see if it made it more playable than the password or sacred word system the American and European releases of the game ended up using. I couldn't imagine how frustrating load times would be playing the game from a disc though. With the amount of times you're going to fail, it seems as though reloading levels would be an inevitability, and that would take up way too much time. But I'm getting away from the game itself and more onto the Famicom Disk System, so what about the visuals in Kid Icarus? Almost all of the sprites were created by the game's original designer Toru Osawa. Kid Icarus was his concept, his characters, and his design from the ground up. Inspired heavily by Greek mythology, the game's story and characters are based on concepts of gods and goddesses, and level designs are influenced by Greek architecture. While the sounds are relatively limited, they are familiar sounds to any first-party Nintendo game fan of that era. Not the best representation of what the NES hardware is capable of, and in some cases, such as when you encounter the Reaper and Reapettes, the sound actually gets kind of annoying. The music, however, is another story. It can get a little repetitious given the fact that you're going to have to restart levels a lot, but it was produced by Nintendo legend Hip Tanaka, responsible for other memorable Nintendo soundtracks and songs, including the legendary Game Boy Tetris Type A song. As I mentioned earlier, Kid Icarus was developed by Nintendo's R&D1. At least, that's how they push it. It was actually almost entirely developed by Toru Osawa. It was only after work on Metroid was nearing completion that other members of R&D1 began to assist in the development of the game, which had gone way behind schedule. Kid Icarus was finished just 3 days before it was due to hit store shelves in Japan, and while the American version does get some extra touch-ups, all in all, the game was lucky to get the help of R&D1, who had just been working on Metroid, or else it never would have seen the light of day. Luckily, the game shares a codebase, or what today we would call an engine. So the Metroid team really did make something bigger out of Kid Icarus, but when you put the R&D1 tag on a Nintendo game, you tend to expect just a little something better from it. Perhaps it was due to the game being rushed only after the rest of R&D1 found out just how far behind in development the game had been. Perhaps it suffered because of the harsh working conditions. Stories exist of developers spending days at a time at the office and sleeping on pieces of cardboard on the floor, trying to protect themselves from the cold floors because the heat was turned off outside of normal business hours. Perhaps it's due to stories like the game's creator, Osawa, only receiving 1 day off for his honeymoon when he got married midway through the development of the game. But his hard work and dedication did pay off, as the game eventually shipped, and although it was much shorter than intended, it did fit well with his original vision. Just what was that vision? It can be hard to tell in the game, as you just complete a level and go on to the next. But as you play, your character is leveling up, and along the way you occasionally find items and upgrades that will aid you on your quest, in an almost Zelda-like way. But you also find other items that may not seem to do anything until you equip them later in the game. And for all of this, there's a reason that can be found in the instruction manual. The Tale of Kid Icarus. Let us go back to the distant past, to an age when the gods and man lived together in harmony. There was once a kingdom called Angel Land. This kingdom was ruled by two beautiful goddesses, Palutena, who administered light, and Medusa, who ruled darkness. Palutena lived in the palace in the sky and administered the light so that man could live in happiness. And bathed in this light, man grew food and lived in peace. However, Medusa, the goddess of darkness, was different. Medusa hated mankind. She took great pleasure in drying up the crops that man took great pains to grow, and in turning people into stone statues. In her anger, Palutena changed Medusa into an ugly monster and banished her to the deep, dark underworld. For being changed into this ugly monster and being forced to live in the underworld, Medusa promised to take over the palace in the sky where Palutena lived. So great was Medusa's anger that she joined forces with the monsters and evil spirits of the underworld, and Medusa's army soon began to surpass Palutena's army in strength. Soon, a war between Palutena and Medusa began. Medusa led a surprise attack on Palutena's army, which could barely fend off the attack. Palutena's army suffered major losses and was heavily defeated in the final battle. What's more, Medusa's army took the three sacred treasures, the Mirror Shield, the Arrow of Light, and the Wings of Pegasus, away from them. Almost all of the warriors in Palutena's army were turned into stone statues, and Palutena herself was imprisoned deep in the palace in the sky. The peaceful realm of Angel Land came to be inhabited by foul and terrible monsters, and was turned into a land of darkness, ruled by the wicked Medusa. Locked in the depths of the palace in the sky, Palutena's strength was drained to its last. As a last resort, she sought the help of the angel youth Pit, who was being held prisoner locked in a deep dungeon in the underworld. Pit was a valiant warrior who used to be in charge of Palutena's personal bodyguards. Armed with a bow and arrow brought to him through Palutena's magical strength, Pit attempted an escape from the underworld. The guard at this time was low in number, as Medusa's army had advanced to the palace in the sky. Pit succeeded in his escape and set out on his long adventure to rescue Palutena. Yet, to defeat Medusa, he had to get the three sacred treasures. Will Pit be able to restore Palutena's light and return it to Angel Land? Only you can answer that question. Even though Kid Icarus doesn't have a thorough story in the gameplay itself, that wasn't uncommon for the time. But reading the story in the manual got me pumped to help Palutena defeat the ugly Medusa for what kind of wicked curse she had put on the Earth, or Angel Land, or whatever. Kid Icarus even has multiple endings. And while some people mock them, some players have found perfectly reasonable ways of explaining how each and every ending makes sense in the context in which it was presented. Seriously, if you haven't seen the endings, I encourage you to play the game, or at least look up the endings, and then come back here and let's have a discussion as to whether or not you think they all make sense. I think a great deal of thought and care went into Kid Icarus, and while maybe not being the banner Nintendo franchise some people think it should be, there's no doubt in my mind that it was a labor of love from a creator who cared about the first game he could call his own and really made something special with it. Although it was called Light Mythology Palutena's Mirror in Japan, in the West we got Kid Icarus. And while Greek mythology says that Daedalus crafted the wings that allowed Icarus to fly too close to the sun, Toru Osawa gave us a little angel who couldn't fly, who led us on a journey to experience our story so far. Hey everybody, thanks for watching episode number 61 of Our Story So Far TV. Okay, so here's the deal. We all just heard about the YouTube changes this week. It kind of makes me not want to do a new episode every 2 weeks. I've been really feeling the crunch anyway. At the same time, I love making this show. It's just fun. So if you like what I do, leave me a little word of encouragement, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, or send me a message on Twitter @NewAngel, that's NUANGEL. I definitely still have a lot of plans and a lot of episodes I'm going to do. I'm just thinking about maybe slowing down. Just for the time being, just to get my head straight. But if you do like what you saw, go to ourstorysofar.tv for more episodes, and until next time, take care of yourself.